Welcome to Heartbeat on Zimpaper's television network, that program where we speak to your heart because your health is your wealth, and certainly issues around our social interaction are things that are closest to our heartbeat. My name is Robin Kodiwa. Now, of course, in this perhaps our last interaction of the year on Heartbeat, we're focusing on something that is absolutely important. And I've got guests on my panel today who are going to be speaking on issues of sexual harassment, not least of all in tertiary institutions. Of course, I'm going to ask that they introduce themselves and their place in the matrix. And later on, I'm going to be joined by a fresh panelist as we continue talking about these issues that touch our hearts the most. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and it's a pleasure to have you here on Heartbeat. I'm going to ask that before obviously going to then introduce the topic, but I want to, you are passionate about this topic, and I want to talk to you and have you introduce yourselves and why you are interested in this issue and why it touches your hearts the most. I'm going to start with the lady immediately to my left. Welcome to Heartbeat.
Thank you so much. Well, my name is Beauty Tembeni. They call me headmistress, well, because I'm the head, I'm a leader, actually. Thank you so much. Well, I'm representing Belvedere Technical Teachers College. I'm so much grateful and glad to be part of this session. And yeah.
And why is it that this is a very important issue for you as a person and as a personality?
All right. As for me, basically, it's important for me because normally I advocate for women. I stand for women. I lead women at my institution and in the society as a whole.
Thank you.
So I believe that women mostly are the victims in this sexual harassment theme. So I advocate mostly for women.
Well, it's a pleasure having you here. And now, the gentleman.
How are you, sir? I'm Murape Onias from Madziva Teachers College. I'm feeling grateful to be in this show today.
And why is this issue important for you as a person? Because, you know, mostly when we talk about sexual harassment, especially in tertiary institutions, indeed wherever, we have few takers who are men, who are passionate and interested in an issue such as that.
Okay, thank you. Like I said, I come from Madziva Teachers College. It's a mining area. There are a lot of sexual harassment there, so we are experiencing it on our day-to-day living.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because we all need allies in an issue as important as this. Now, the lady.
Okay, my name is Talik Rangandi. I'm from Nyadire Teachers College.
Thank you so much for joining us all the way from Nyadire Teachers College. And finally, the lady.
I'm Mrs. Grace Umbatsa from Seke Teachers College. I'm a lecturer in the Health and Life Skills section, but I'm also working with the students as a counselor and also in charge of students' welfare. And I'm very glad to be part of this forum today. And we are absolutely grateful to have you here because obviously you have lived and worked experiences because in your day-to-day talking to various people who will have unfortunately gone through such a traumatic experience, you have these issues. You've got pretty much a front row seat to what we're going to be discussing today. Yes. And certainly we're talking about sexual harassment policy and amplifying the voice of women and adolescent girls in tertiary institutions. Now, this show is brought to you today by ZTN, thanks to our partners, the Education Coalition of Zimbabwe, ECOZI, and the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, Innovation, Science and Technology Development, with support from the Canada Funds for Local Initiatives. Now, we aim to amplify the voices of millions of young people who should otherwise not have a voice and a say in things and issues that affect their lives the most. Now, in studio today, I'm joined by, as you have seen, students, a lecturer, and a representative from the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, who, as I said, will be joining us a bit later on, because we're talking about issues to do with policy. And we cannot talk about lived experiences without then speaking to
policy. Now, before we get into the gist of the matter today, well, let's take a look at the background issues to do with harassment. Zimbabwe has made efforts to develop legislation and to ratify international conventions addressing issues of abuse based on gender, harassment and workplace inequality. Now, the biggest challenge has been the absence of a piece of legislation that specifically covers sexual harassment. This has created loopholes in instances where sexual harassment cases have been brought before the courts of law. Now, a place where sexual harassment has been very common is in tertiary institutions, where mainly female students have fallen prey to mostly male lecturers, usually under the threat of being awarded bad grades. Now, the Education Coalition of Zimbabwe and the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, Innovation, Science and Technology Development, with support from the Canada Funds for Local Initiatives, have come together to conduct consultative dialogues on the sexual harassment policy. In addition, having realized the exclusion of women and adolescent girls in policy making, the consultations have been designed to ensure female students constitute 70% of the contributors. The ultimate goal, of course, is to make sure that students become a major stakeholder in the development of that policy. So that, of course, is the background of where we are coming from. We have come across various forms of sexual harassment in our day-to-day living, and certainly people who are here today and are passionate about these issues also have encountered, perhaps not even personally, but in your day-to-day we see nuances of the ugly head that is reared of sexual harassment. Now, I want to ask what some of the sexual harassment issues that are found in tertiary education. I'm going to start with you, Nyadire, for example, as a place, as an institution, and even surrounds. What are some of the cases that you encounter or have come across with regards to sexual harassment?
Okay, thank you once again. Like basically looking at sexual harassment, like pane ma comments anopiwa nevanhu kuti munhu akabatana munhu anenge asiri kutoziva kuti ari kutoitwa sexual harassment ipapapo, but that comment inoto like kutokomenta kuti mazamu ako they're so nice, they're so big and so forth.
And that's the problem, really, and that's something we were talking about even yesterday with students from another institution here at the University of Zimbabwe. And they were talking about how some comments may even come across, somebody is thinking we do talk about a nice comment, a decent comment, you know, but what I'm feeling and how I receive it, and sometimes even, this is the funny thing, sometimes even where it's coming from, you can get a comment from somebody and they're dressed in a particular way and they say, well, you're looking good, and then it's a good comment. You say thank you, but you can even get the absolute same comment from somebody else, and then it comes across totally differently because of the intention. And somebody was suggesting that perhaps somebody can say something, and then you decide, and then you tell the person, no, I didn't like that comment or not. But the problem with sexual harassment is once it's said, it cannot be unsaid. Whatever the comment has been, you have to live with whatever has been said, and that is one of the problems we have. But you work with students, and you are in an institution where you come across a lot of various cases. You can also give us, instances. But before we even go there, I want you to give me two things. I want you to help us understand what sexual harassment actually is. And then you give us instances that you also have come across at Kwaseke, the instances of sexual harassment.
Thank you very much. Yes, we are in the process of trying to help our female students to really understand what constitutes sexual harassment. So we are teaching them that when we talk of sexual harassment, we are talking of those acts that are unwanted and perhaps also repeated. Something that you don't want, and you have stated that you don't want that action, but it has been repeated, then it becomes sexual harassment. Because sometimes they would want to talk about issues when it's actually not harassment, when they've maybe consented to something. Now that there's a problem, they want to say sexual harassment. So I think the first thing is that they should understand what sexual harassment is all about. Now, when we work with them, yes, we sometimes it's things that we hear about. The challenge that we have in tertiary is that we are working with students that are over 18. These are adults. So sometimes, like she's saying, if a comment is passed, sometimes I don't go pay the pass a comment. So then it doesn't come to our attention, because sometimes they can also speak for themselves. So to actually say that we are having these cases, so normally when we hear of these things happening, what we simply do is we go to them and we talk to them about them. We try to educate them. No, this thing should not be like this. Kana munhu ati asikuda, arikuda kuti asikuda. But not to really say that we have cases that we really try to work with, because sometimes it's rumors that we get, and sometimes the suspicions, but if they've not been confirmed by anyone, then that becomes our major challenge when we talk of sexual harassment.
Absolutely, absolutely. But perhaps if we're looking at victims, because we also are very sensitive towards the victims of sexual harassment, who mostly are victims of sexual harassment in tertiary institutions, and how have you, for example, come across issues to do with sexual harassment?
Well, specifically at our college, Belvedere, victims of sexual harassment mostly are women, a girl child mostly. But to a lesser extent, also boys are involved, but greatly are girls, because girls at times they feel inferior and they are not that confident in expressing how they feel about being harassed. And at times you can be harassed and maybe fail to tell someone, or maybe if you tell someone or a leader or maybe the SRC, they can maybe delay on solving the issue. And at times maybe, yeah, they are reluctant most of the times in solving these issues.
Which is absolutely sad, because justice delayed, of course, is justice denied. And you particularly come from a very interesting area, because as you were saying, there's a lot of artisanal mining, there's a lot of the social dynamics are different. Kumadziwa, tell us about your experiences of sexual harassment in your area, how you've come to know of sexual harassment, and how you've become a person who actually fights against sexual harassment in your area.
Okay, thank you. Mostly sexual harassment at Madziwa it is almost caused by peer pressure, especially to girls, because sometimes they lack food, sometimes they lack shelter, sometimes they lack school fees. So they end up in a peer pressure of getting in a relationship with old people and then trying to give them sex in favor of money. So we are encountering a difficult situation at Madziwa Teachers College.
So definitely even the economics would otherwise force somebody to become a part of a toxic culture, and that toxic culture is one that that leads them to being taken advantage of, for example. So as a life skills educator, what he's talking about, that's something that also breeds a different culture in the matrix. So how do you confront something like that if it comes to you?
Now what we do, I think in all the institutions, when they come in as first years, we have what we call life skills workshop, where we try to empower them with life skills, survival skills, when on campus and even outside campus. And we try by all means to give them information so that they have a choice. So at the end of the day, sometimes we are saying, you had a choice. Why didn't you make the right choice sometimes? No, we are not saying they will not be harassed or anything. But what the challenge, like I'm saying, is these students, because they are over 18 now, sometimes it becomes very difficult now to really say to them, this you cannot do, this you can do. But what we simply do is try to empower them, to give them the survival skills. If you have challenges, maybe it's economic challenges, these are some of the avenues. You can do this, you can do this. If you have challenges and you want some counseling, we have counseling services. We expose them to all that. But at the end of the day, we also want to encourage them to use the support systems that are there instead of resorting to other things that might really be hazardous to them.
Absolutely. Tembeni, tell me about, because we are seeing a situation where you need to go and have an issue addressed to get redress. What's the current situation now when you get sexually harassed? What are the steps that are there? Or what are the steps you take? Who do you approach, and where do you get help?
All right. Basically, at our college, normally, if you get harassed sexually, you approach the dean of students first before anyone else. If you approach the dean of students, then the dean will further the case maybe to other administrative boards. Or maybe you can approach a counselor whom you feel free to open up and express what you feel. We have counselors, mostly they are our health and life skills lecturers. Those are the ones who solve those issues. So mostly it's either you go to the dean of students or you can choose a counselor whom you feel free to talk to.
But then sometimes in other institutions, looking broadly, you need to go and make a report to somebody who, in all essence, is a lecturer. And you're talking to them about a peer, because you've been, in the instance that you've been sexually harassed by a lecturer, then you go to another lecturer. And a lot of people seem to find that very difficult, and that's also a discussion we've been having ongoing, to say it's like you've been beaten up by the police and you have to go and report to the police. So is that not something that also causes a problem and has a lot of people unable to make reports and make sure that their issues are addressed?
Well, if, for instance, as you say, that if a lecturer is the one who harassed a student, you approach the dean of students, because
Absolutely.
the dean of students advocates for students.
Now, you want to get that degree, you want to get a good, flawless degree, and you're probably going to do that without the help of any other person, but then you are threatened with getting bad grades. If you do not sleep with me, lecturer A says you will get bad grades. Nyadire, chichi noitika ikoko, kwa nyadire kana muri ikoko, kana zvazonzi. Well, this do you come across, have you come across issues like that where your fellow students also report back and say we're being threatened by bad grades?
Kuva pandakatanga ndinodzidza panyadire hapana case yakamboitika, but as my colleague has said, kana pazoitika something chakarerekera ikoko, you report maybe ku SRC, someone who are comfortable naye, and then that issue inobva yazoaddresswa kusvika yazosvika ku police. And
in Seke, you have actually worked with a lot more cases and a lot of students coming to you. Sex for grades, that is something that is actually a known threat within our education system. Have you come across that, or if you were to come across that, how would you handle an issue or an instance like it?
Yeah, like I was saying, in most cases, it's like rumors. It's nothing that has been reported. So sometimes it becomes very difficult. But we understand, yes, it happens, that maybe a lecturer can say, your diploma lies in my hands, and if you don't do this, you're going to fail. But we try, like I was saying, we give them this, we try to empower them. And we try to tell them how it all works so that they understand that you can't have a situation like that when you are just failed by one lecturer. But we know kuti kune vamwe malecturer vanozotaura zvine mutsindo kudarika zvatinenge tataura isu. So it can be there. But like she was saying, kuti structure yacho ye-reporting is not very clear. Maybe the police, when it comes into place, it will solve a lot of things. It's not very clear how it's going to be handled. So sometimes the student will just go maybe to a lecturer, not even a counselor, somebody that they feel free to talk to. So sometimes it's very difficult to get to hear about these things, but we cannot deny that somebody can actually threaten. But the bottom line is they are empty threats. Because the process of grading someone, and when somebody finally leaves college, it involves a lot of people and even boards. And at the end of the day, that somebody's failure is not determined by one lecturer. So it's just empty threats that somebody may use because perhaps they want to harass someone.
And they're in a position of power. Which brings me,
authority, yes.
Absolutely, and which brings me to a very important thing that you said. Before we bring in the ministry to listen to us, and before we implore to them, what do you want to implore? What do you want to see, for example, in policy? What do you want to see in the policy change? Because you were talking about how the policy should address certain things, because at the moment there are a lot of opaque sports, what would you want to see?
I think the policy should be very articulate on what constitutes sexual harassment. And then I think the other issue is on the reporting structures. What exactly are we going to do? Because at the end of the day, we want the female students to feel that they have the support and to have the confidence to speak out should they be harassed. But as long as we don't have that in that policy, then again it remains the challenge. Because like we are saying, I'm sure it's there, sexual harassment may be there, but because we don't have anything that is policy, that is saying this is the way to go. If someone is harassed, this is what is going to do, this is what must happen. So I think it must have clear reporting structures. I think those two things are critical in the policy.
Absolutely. And Onyus, in policy, as you're hearing, as a male member of society who wants to make sure there's no sexual harassment, especially within the college, what do you want to see in the policy? If we're going to talk to government today and say, we need the policy, we need a policy framework, and we need a policy implementation. What do you want to see changed by the current situation?
Okay, I think after the case has been reported, okay, after the case here reported, what are the measures dzinozoitwa, ma-penalties anozopiwa munhu anenge aita that sexual harassment kuti ndeapi? Like ma-penalties, if it is a lecturer, you should even withdraw the certificate so that the learning environment will become free.
Absolutely, because the harsher the punishment, if somebody knows, Kuti, what I'm doing has the possibility of having me utterly, totally removed, and this is threatening somebody's, livelihood, then of course they'll have less and less of an instance where they may want to sexually harass people. And perhaps you may want to weigh in, Beauty, Kuti, in terms of policy and what you want to see spoken to in the policy. What is it that you want addressed?
Well, as Onya said, I can add on that on what he said. Like, there should be a very hard penalty for that person who would have harassed a student, like maybe being arrested or the certificate being withdrawn for good. If they emphasize on that, maybe sexual harassment can be low.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, right now we may actually go and tap into the knowledge of Clifton Dawanyi, who is the Project Officer for Education Coalition of Zimbabwe. Now let's hear him speak on the work that they personally have been doing in advocating for legislation that is specific to sexual harassment in colleges.
Us as the Education Coalition of Zimbabwe, we are now coming in as an organization which is a civil society or a membership-based civil society organization with around 55 members who are operating within the education sector to advocate on issues around sexual harassment through equipping young women in tertiary institutions on policy and leadership advocacy. And recently we got sponsorship from Canada International, and this sponsorship is to fund a project that we are running, which is called Amplifying the Voice of Young Women in Tertiary Colleges of Zimbabwe in the creation of a robust national sexual harassment policy. And you realize that recently the Public Service Commission is approached us through the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, Innovation, Science and Technology Development, and they said they are tabling a national sexual harassment policy. And us as ECOS, we realized that students in tertiary education, in tertiary colleges, they are an important stakeholder when it comes to having an input in sexual harassment issue policy. And we realized that without their voice in the making of this national sexual harassment policy, then we will have a document which does not speak maybe to their needs, especially when it comes to the challenges that they are facing in tertiary education colleges.
Well, it is no use to be crying on and on about sexual harassment when we do not talk to the people that matter the most. We should be talking to the custodians of our education sector here in Zimbabwe. And joining us now from the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, Innovation, Science and Technology Development, we have a representative, Mr. Elisha Ndanga. Mr. Ndanga, welcome to welcome to Heartbeat. And specifically, you've been following what has been said, the stuff that is happening in universities. And certainly we've had instances where we've seen in other countries, in Nigeria, which we had a very prominent case of especially things like 6 for grades. There's a lot of sexual harassment that is happening in these institutions, and we are talking about the policy implementation, the policy crafting, sexual harassment policy, and we're trying to amplify the voice of women and adolescent girls in tertiary institutions. From what you've heard, what do you have to say just from the get-go on the issues that we've been talking about so far?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the issue of sexual harassment is quite topical in our institutions. And what we have done as a ministry is to ensure that we address such issues, because it actually affects the quality of education that we deliver. And more specifically, the issue of the reconfiguration of our education system that we want. So when we reconfigure the education system, we want people to get satisfaction out of what they do, and most importantly, the quality. So if they are disgruntled, then we have serious problems of producing human capital that is not well-backed and very vulnerable in most circumstances, yes.
Absolutely. But so, from your view as a person and as a personality, what kind of national policy should be established to address sexual harassment in tertiary institutions, for example?
Right. We've actually led with dismay and abhorrence the fact that we have so many reports that are coming and that speaks to sexual harassment. And as has been said, you know, the issue of sexual harassment is very easy to conceal and very difficult to prove. Yeah. So what we have said for a start is we want the sexual harassment policy to be in place, and that's what we did as a ministry. And maybe to give you a brief of that is that we had that policy, and we subjected it to Public Service Commission just to give their views and their input. But it's a very beautiful document which now the Public Service Commission needed to take and then try to panel beat it and then say, okay, this must apply to all the ministries that we have, all the public service. So what is happening is we are going to have this, and this is the policy that we are discussing. So once it's adopted and it's passed, then it has to come back to our ministry specifically. We are going to domesticate that, and then it must speak to the dictates of what we want as a ministry. Because this policy that you are talking about covers the whole public service.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. And Ranga, this the policy, as he says, covers the whole public service, and it means it's a broad document. But if we were to ask you what specifically you want to see in that policy, you're sitting next to the person who has the document, who has seen the document, but you may, and it's being domesticated to, and it will speak to various institutions. But then you want it to further be domesticated to speak to you as a person, as an individual. What do you want to see in that policy? What would you tell him, Kuti? Because now Takuti does something of an outreach, as it were. What do you want to see in that policy before they say we will now have gotten to a place where we want to start implementation?
Okay. I think if they include kuti per policy, mun anenga itwa sexually harassment, like oh yeah mun anenga itwa victimized, wobviswa pa-institution so that haramba achitarisana nemunhu anenge aita sei amuharasa iyeye, and then the person anenge amuharasa iyeye ngatobhaniwa zvachose, like kuti not kuti wobva kunyadire woenda kubelvedere kana kuti woenda ngatobhaniwa zvachose ku-institution ku-any government ngatobviswa zvachose.
And that's a thing that is absolutely important, because even if you remove the perpetrator, but if the victim is still within those confines, they may face some downhill victimization from people who just look at you and say, oh, dear, how are we going to address that as government? Have you put a bit of thought into that as well?
Yeah, going forward, because we've seen sexual harassment as a disaster, so to speak. So in order to mitigate that disaster, for an example, in the earliest possible time, we had to put that policy in place. But going forward, we want, and we have heard from other sectors of government, to say, let us criminalize the issue of sexual harassment. So going forward, what we are looking forward to is to have an act that speaks to that. So like what I indicated, that this is just a disaster, we want to avert it. But going forward, we want an act that criminalizes sexual harassment. So currently, the lecturers that are talking about, for an example, we may not necessarily be the perpetrators only of such an act. We have what we call the rules and regulations of the public service. That speaks to what he's talking about. But there is no criminal, addendum to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So going forward, we want to criminalize it. We want to make it. There is a move actually to have it as an act, to have an act that speaks to and address sexual harassment.
And I think the beauty of what Vandanga is saying is actually the fact that while we're saying we have a problem, he's saying we have a disaster. And to hear government speak and acknowledge and actually say it's even worse than we're saying is a beautiful first step, because usually when we're trying to engage government, what we think we would expect is government will say, oh, is it that bad, or that sort of thing. But to then have government, it would actually seem that the biggest advocates, if we were to look at it, are actually government, who are saying we do not want this. It denigrates the beauty of our education system, one that is celebrated all over the world, certainly. But perhaps to also put into perspective what we're talking about today, we shall have something on the Executive Dean of Student Affairs, Ishonesu Chaka, a great friend of ZTN, and he spoke on how sexual harassment has no place in tertiary institutions and how such cases should be dealt with.
Conversant of the fact that sexual harassment is an ill that exists in our community and even in schools. So to safeguard that, they've come up with policies and address them to protect, students and staff in the community. And really that's how it's dealt with. And it's something that they do not, condone whatsoever. It's a huge crime. If it's a student, if it's a staff, the students, students and staff have been disciplined, students have been expelled.
There we have it. And another beautiful story there coming from Dean Ishe Unesu Chaka. And he is saying the same word that has been spoken here by Mr. Elisha Ndanga, the word crime. It is a crime. And let us criminalize people who do that. Let us criminalize the act of sexual harassment. Of course, this has been a very important and interesting start as we speak towards these issues. What I do hope is we will have people even on our panels going forward and within these frameworks who will actually speak to their personal experiences, because coincidentally enough, I was actually watching a whole film that was made based on the sexual harassment and sexual grades issues that were being talked about in Nigeria. And certainly, if the more we talk about these issues, the more people who are perpetrators will be afraid to actually perpetrate and continue in these very vile acts, and our institutions will become cleaner and cleaner. Before I come back to you, Mr. Ndanga, let us just hear closing remarks from you going forward on what you want to see before we start looking into a future where we hope sexual harassment will be something that is a thing of the past. I'll start with you, Beauty.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I'm really thankful and grateful that this policy is actually practical, and I'm sure it will be put in place. And like as others said, that there should be penalties for those who harass others, because sexual harassment is actually violence. It's a crime, right? So if it's, as the dean said, that if it's student to student, the student should be expelled from college, because it will show that you are not a teacher material. If you are sexually harassing your peers, it means you harass school kids when you start teaching out there, right? So if it's lecturer to student, the lecturer should be expelled as well, because it shows that he cannot teach teachers to be teachers. You understand, right? So I'm sure if if it is put in place, it will actually help others, and it will make the sexual harassment to decline, or to people will stop sexual harassment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So basically, that's what I can say.
Absolutely.
Thank
Onias, what do you want to see going forward as we dream of a sexual harassment-free world and a safe environment for our women and our girls?
Okay, thank you. I think I'm looking forward to see the police emphasizing on issues of adolescent behavior. They shouldn't tolerate that adolescent behavior. So I want to see the police emphasizing on that area.
Absolutely. Ranga?
Okay, thank you. I think basically looking at females, they should also avoid kwenda kuma offices, ema teachers, like very big. They should have a company so that to not minimize sexual harassment police.
Absolutely. Because what we also want to say is there are certain things that we teach even our children. If you're going to go out, when we grew up, Kuchidama call box, you had to have change in your pocket. Whoever you're going with, even if it's on a date, make sure you've got a couple of coins to make the call home and say, I've been abandoned, because sometimes people want to use that power. Well, I'm not going to drive you back home if you refuse my advances. There's a certain, of course, precautionary measures that we should always have, and we should always know, especially when we're going out, when we're going to certain places, going to certain offices, even going drinking, even for social instances. But by and large, as Mandanga would agree, while we've got precautionary measures that our children should take, they should be the exception and not the rule, because our institutions, our schools, our places of learning should be absolutely safe. You should go with someone, not because he's a predator, but just as a precautionary measure. Wandanga should be somebody who you absolutely trust with your life, because we are fathers at the end of the day, and what we yearn for and wish for our daughters and even our sons in certain instances are things that we should yearn for these other people who are in our care. We do say in institutions we will be in loco parentis, we are as good as your parent. Wandanga, can you close this for us, because you really came with a certain depth and you spoke to our dreams, hopes and aspirations.
Yeah, thank you very much. I can only assure the students that upenyu wenyu idambudziko remwoyo yedu. Okay, like what you had rightly said, we have a role to play as parents. That is the local parents that we are talking about. And we are actually excited to actually move this, and we are seeing positives in what we are doing. We are not sleeping. We make sure that you are as comfortable as ever in the institutions that we have. But apart from that, you know, we are talking of the institutions that we have, and we talk of physical and so on and so on. But let us also take into cognizance the issue of cyberbullying, also cyber harassment, which is coming now in in a new form and format. because we are using these gadgets, we are using actually social media. So we have a lot of harassment that is happening there. So I think you must be aware of that, you must be privy to that knowledge and know exactly what it entails. But we are having workshops that will roll out to sensitize both the lecturers and the students in the institution so that they understand the dictates of and the objects of the police.
Absolutely. And as we did say from the start of the program, we also need to understand what sexual harassment is, because somewhere out there, somebody has been repeatedly sexually harassed, and because they don't know they're being sexually harassed, they just are enduring it and enduring the pain, and we've got people out there who are in very sad circumstances. Now, of course, this show has been brought to you here on ZTN by our partners, the Education Coalition of Zimbabwe and the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, Innovation, Science and Technology Development, with support from the Canada Funds for Local Initiatives. Of course, these are partners we hope we will continue having such interactions with, because these interactions speak to what touches our hearts the most. And we really want to have clean societies, clean environments, and we need to be absolutely safe as a nation and as a people. So from me, Robert Mkundua, and from here at ZTN, we hope you have a very happy festive season in spite of what COVID-19 has done to us this year. But certainly there's always light at the end of the tunnel. So from the Education Coalition of Zimbabwe, from Canada, and from the Ministry of Health and Tertiary Education, have a great day and have a great rest of 2020.